Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. I do hope you're well, and we are doing something slightly different this month for Fabulous Folklore. Because it's the month most often associated with witchcraft, thanks to Halloween, I thought it would be fun to introduce you to some witches and magical practitioners. Now, these people are all based in the United Kingdom, and they all bring their own kind of flavour of folk magic and folklore into their practice. So I thought you might find it quite interesting from that point of view. And our very first magical practitioner is Ùna Blyth. Now, I've been quite lucky to know Una for a while now, so I'm a little bit biased in saying that she's absolutely awesome. But she is an occult writer, researcher, and practitioner of peat bog folk magic. She lives on a small croft in the Shetland Islands, which, if you're not aware, is a subarctic archipelago between Scotland and Norway. And her first book, Muses No More, Portraits of Occult Women, is forthcoming with Hexen Press. Now, she has written for a range of publications, including Folklore for Resistance, Sabbat Magazine, Rituals and Declarations, Cunning Folk Magazine, Doggerland, Fire and Knives, and Reframing Immersive Theatre, which was with Palgrave Macmillan. Now, she's particularly interested in queer feminist explorations of magical history, as well as the fine line between magic and madness. She's a former member of Foolish People, creators of ritual, film, theatre, and books, and a mentee of the late Buddhist teacher Michael Stone. And with her partner, Belladonna Paloma, she runs the online ritual supply store Church of Squirt, and she's also the guiding teacher of Insight Meditation Shetland. I can also say that the Church of Squirt products are phenomenal because I've got one of the perfumes and it's fabulous. But without any further ado, let's go and meet Ùna. Hello and welcome to Fabulous Folklore.
Hi, Icy. Thank you for having me.
Well, we've known each other a while now, so I just thought you were one of the first people I thought of when I decided to do this series.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to be here. Yeah, we have known each other a while now. It's been a while. Yeah, I don't know, a couple of years.
Something like that.
Maybe, yeah. So extra nice to be here chatting to you.
Excellent. So obviously this whole kind of interview series is kind of about like folk magic and witchcraft in like the 21st century, so not the historical view of it that I normally cover on the podcast. So it's more of a lived experience kind of aspect. So how
Mhm.
would you define witchcraft to a non-practitioner?
I mean, to be honest, I'd use a really boring dictionary definition to start with. So that I think the dictionary definition is something like witchcraft is the practice of magic. Um, Generally, it says for malevolent purposes or for evil purposes, using spells or incantations. And for me, that stands really true. Like a witch is somebody who casts spells. Witchcraft is the practice of casting spells, and historically, we can see that, yeah, happening throughout history across many cultures. However, when it comes to our times, witchcraft means everything under the sun, or it can mean everything under the sun. And witchcraft is generally used to refer to nature-based practices. And within that, there's, a witchcraft religion, Wicca. So that's where I'd begin. I've probably already gone beyond what I would need to say to a beginner, but I just want to say I'm old school. I start with a dictionary definition, and then say, there's other stuff too in the modern day, but we've got to start with a dictionary.
Fair enough. So that being said, what would you say brought you to practice in general, if not necessarily witchcraft?
Morticia. Uh, I was a huge family fan when I was a kid. And I know that lots of the kids around about my age, I mean, I think, when did the Addams Family come out? Was it 1990? I want to say 1992.
Somewhere around then, yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't have even been 10 yet, but I remember it coming out. And rather than identifying with Wednesday Addams, I really identified with and was just bowled over and really idolized Angelica Houston as Morticia Addams. And I think what I found fascinating about her was the way in which she didn't shy away from darkness, from sadness, from pure malevolence. And I think she just really showed me that you needn't be scared of these things. You can actually relish in them. There's can be this real sensuality to them, to darkness. And I think, going back to the dictionary definition of witchcraft, it's like that's what allured me. It's malevolence, it's darkness, it's brutality. I don't believe that magic has a huge amount of morality attached to it. And that really excited me. So yeah, Morticia was my gateway to all of this. And then of course you get bought. I think my first tarot deck was, well, it was more of an oracle deck, was the Brian Froud deck. It's the so it was very fae based. And yeah, I was I think I was the only goth in my village, basically, possibly the only goth in the north of Shetland. South Shetland was full of them, but yeah.
I love that idea about magic as being neutral, because I can't remember who said it, but I remember, and it's probably one of those things where everybody repeats it and it just becomes like,
Probably, yeah.
and somebody had said about how it was a bit like electricity, that you could use it to, like, warm your house, or like, run your television or whatever, but you can obviously then use it for more nefarious things like electric fences and stuff as well. So it all depends on your intent, and also who's on the receiving end of it, I guess, rather than it just simply being good or bad. And it's like people maybe aren't used to having that kind of level of responsibility for what they're doing, maybe, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's really true. But also there's something to do with empowerment there. So and about what happens when we are using taking malevolent actions. And when we're taking malevolent actions, often it's because somebody's wronged us. And so I think when we're considering what we're doing with magic, it's like even malevolent actions can actually be really positive actions. And I think that's often forgotten. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity to the lack of morality in magic. I think it's kind of like birth. If we think of witches and midwives as kind of aligned throughout history, birth is morally neutral. So is magic.
Mm-hmm. So, would you say there's a difference between witchcraft and magic? Because I know obviously there's some people who might refer to themselves as like magicians, and I don't mean in the Penn and Teller sense of the word, but magicians or even sorcerer as a word I've seen definitely used a lot more recently. But then, they wouldn't consider themselves a witch, and maybe other people wouldn't consider them a witch. So, would you say there's a difference between them, or are they both just ultimately names for the same thing?
I mean, I think you've kind of summed up what I think, which is that witchcraft is one form of practicing magic. You also have like ceremonial magic or angelic magic, or there's lots of different kinds of magical practice. Especially when we think on it in a global perspective, like so many kinds that I would love to see that list of different magical schools. So witchcraft is really just one magical school. And within witchcraft, nobody is agreed to what witchcraft is. But also there's so many kinds of witchcraft. And the politics of witchcraft is so enjoyable to read about. I really recommend anyone going into especially the like post 1950s witchcraft politics in the UK and Europe. Really fascinating. But yeah, there's so much infighting in witchcraft and so much infighting in magic in general, magical spheres in general. That I think we can just say there's lots of bits and pieces going on, who practices what, when, where they come from. Like there are a lot of opinions to be had.
Mm-hmm. And I think obviously when you get onto the internet, there's a lot of opinions about everything, and then they all just kind of
Yeah,
match up.
yeah, yeah. It's a big
Um,
spreadsheet.
oh, I would love to see if someone could get magic into Excel. That would be amazing. Um, Flippy would take on a very different form if that was the case. Um, obviously you're based. I'm saying obviously. I've mentioned in the intro that you're based in Shetland. So
Mm.
how would you say that feeds into your practice? Because obviously that's going to be a completely different landscape to someone who's in, I don't know, like, somewhere in Spain, for example.
Sure. I mean, think being a Shetlander as well as living in Shetland really informs my magical practice, because the lore and the culture and the magical culture even of Shetland has been really instilled in me from quite a young age. So Shetland is very big on heritage for the sake of local identity. And so we had projects like storytellers coming into our primary schools and telling us about the mythology of our islands. So that those forms of magic have really stayed with me. Even I've lived all over the place and came back to Shetland as a 36-year-old, I think. And yeah, the landscape has really stayed with me, and it's been something I've longed for. And I think there is like a Shetland sickness that people get, this longing. And it's for the landscape, which is very sort of bounteous, but also very barren. And when it comes to magical practice, then the barrenness of the landscape, the fact that very little grows here without a lot of expertise, that the climate is very extreme, that the place is overgrazed, so that the landscape is very, kind of battered and beaten up, and there are very few tools to use. So as magical practitioners, as witches, then, where you are dictates the tools you use. And in Shetland, we have like rocks and peat, a little bit of wood here and there if you can get some trees to grow, and seawater and running water in burns. So that's our toolkit. It's really basic, and I find that really thrilling. And historically, I'm pretty into reading about historical charms and incantations and historical magic in Shetland, folk magic. And it's amazing how stripped back rituals are and spells are compared to other parts of Scotland, for example, and Scandinavia, because Shetland's a real melting pot of both cultures, being halfway between, the north of Scotland and Norway. So yeah, Shetland kind of is the whole of my practice in many ways.
So do you find then with sort of tales from Shetland, do they like lean more towards feeling like the ones that you get in Scotland? Are they more like the ones you get in Scandinavia, or are they just this whole other sort of type of story in between?
I think they're kind of their own thing. You do see similarities in traditional incantations between sort of motifs from Scandinavian lore and charms, and not so much with Scottish practices. So I'd say it's more in common with Scandinavia, Scandinavian folk magic. But also there's Orkney next door. And so when we're looking at folk magic of Shetland, then the practices are pretty similar to Orkney's, but a little bit more stripped back. So, for example, there's a ritual that a witch might do to sort of lure Satan in. So, to be taken over by the devil, to commune with the devil. And in Orkney, this would be what you do is you'd go between the tide marks, so high and low tide on the beach. You'd lie down and you'd make the shape of the cross with your body, and you'd have rocks on different parts of your body, and you'd say this long incantation to the effect of, take my body, devil. And you do this on a full moon. And in Shetland, we have the same ritual. So you go between the tide marks, you prepare yourself for the devil. But all you do, you don't lie down on the beach. You just sit there making the witch's stance. So having one foot below your, one hand below your foot, one hand on top of your head, no rocks. And all you say is, take out between my twa hands. So take everything that's between my two hands. So one line and one posture, and then you go home. It doesn't seem to really matter when you do it according to the moon cycle. It's really basic. Yeah, I just love that. It's so simple. And that's kind of not really like anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. So what would you get out of communing with the devil? Like, I'm assuming that he's not like moving in permanently.
Well, I think with communing with the devil, you would be inviting the devil to offer you gifts in return for services, so offering you boons. And often, if you're a witch, then you'd receive your power from the devil. So some people would be hereditary witches, and some people would need either that magic to be activated, or they would need to have some other kind of mentor, and that might be the devil. In exchange, you might have to, leave offerings. That you might be leaving whiskey. You might be doing a certain little ritual every so often. But what you would gain from the devil usually is magical powers,
Right.
and that's what we all want.
Quite like the way that the Shetland one's just so much more straightforward than the Orkney one. I
It's
much
so
better if
basic.
you've got quite a short, a bad memory. That would be so much better.
So good, because my memory is terrible, like really bad. And just to have to say one line, it's magical heaven. And Shetlanders are pretty quiet people because you don't see folk very often here. If you live rurally like we do, you're lucky if you see somebody, a couple of times a week. You just don't see that many humans. So pretty quiet folk. So one line out loud, it's excessive, you know.
Oh, I like that. And I love the idea that you've actually got the storytellers actually telling sort of these stories as well, because I think that that's probably something that you definitely don't get in England. Like we kind of
Mm,
turn things into like a spectacle because it's a bank holiday, and, and
yeah.
so on like that, which isn't the same thing. Um, so what would you say then are some of your favorite tales about Shetland that you wish people knew?
I mean, in a way, it's not even the tales, it's the way that they are told, the language that is used, and the humor that is used. So there are lots of stories of witches, but there are also stories of cunning folk. And I think the stories of cunning folk are my favorite. Um, so I've dug out one especially for you,
Oh yeah.
which is just a little account. It's a little account of a priest clergyman who goes around to a house where somebody has been very ill, possibly with TB, I think, consumption. And so the clergyman goes around to this house and says, how's the patient doing? And I've dug out the response. So how's the patient doing who is dying of consumption? And the patient's mother says, "Oh yeah, so we gied to the kirkyard and brought mould frae a grave of the body that was last buried there and laid it on her breast. As this had nae effect, we gied to the brig o'er which the last corpse was ta'en and took some water frae the burn below and made her drink it. This failed too, and as a last resource, we drug a muckle hole in the ground and put her in it." So to translate, basically, priest goes around, says, how's the patient doing? This woman who's dying of consumption. And her mother says, well, we went to the graveyard and brought molds, so just graveyard dirt, from the grave of the last body buried there, and we put it on the patient's chest. As this had no effect, we went to the bridge where the last corpse was taken over, that was buried, and took some water from the burn below and made the patient drink it. As this failed, we dug a big hole in the ground and put her in it. And it's just there's so many Shetland like tales of cunning folk that are just like that, just like really brutal, like pretty humorous tales of, well, we tried to do this thing to fix somebody, that didn't work, so we tried this thing, then we tried this thing, and then, well, they're dead. And with witches, it's often cautionary tales, and yeah, they're pretty morbid stories, really, when you get into them.
Yeah. I suppose when you were saying before about it being quite a battered landscape, I guess you would possibly have a slightly less romanticized view of life, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard place to live. Like, even living where we do with a car, it still takes us 50 minutes driving on a clear road to get to the next town. So really in the middle of nowhere. This past winter, we were without power for 5 days. They had to have a tractor come and deliver food in the surrounding area to people who didn't, who weren't sort of prepared, or who were older, frail. So it's pretty you do turn inwards naturally, and that makes you quite contemplative. And so things like death, I think, in the community, death hits different when you're in a more contemplative state of life. And so there are a lot of good death jokes in Shetland, and I love that.
That is quite an interesting tradition.
Dug a big hole and stuck it in it.
Oh, it's to the point, though.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love that. Yeah, like I said, there's quietness and there's a directness to Shetlanders. It's really enjoyable.
Cool. Well, you talked about the idea of being contemplative. I know you also read tarot, and obviously it's become really quite ubiquitous, I think, in sort of both like more general spiritual circles, but also like witchcraft as well. And I don't remember it, and I know we mentioned this before I started recording. I don't remember it being that heavily emphasized in a lot of the 101 books of like the 1990s and early 2000s. And I think some of them obviously because possibly they were aimed at teenagers, it was less of a thing. I don't know. But would you say that tarot itself is a must-learn skill, or would you say that divination of whatever form, like, works for someone, which one is more important? So is it divination that's important, or would you say that you've got to learn tarot?
I would say you totally do not have to learn tarot. We were joking before we started recording about the rise of big tarot, like the rise of big pharma. The rise of big tarot is a thing, and we're obsessed with tarot, and it is not the only form of divination. It's not even that old. And also, it came from the courts of Italy, the royal courts, and so it's super bourgeois. You have to, even nowadays, these tarot decks that are upwards of £50. You get indie tarot decks that you pay extortionate amounts of money for, and it's like this none of this is necessary. It's a lovely hobby to have. I'm a tarot reader, and I think it's really useful as a form of divination. But you can divine using anything. You have the practice of geomancy, where you're divining using dirt. You can divine using rocks. You can use any object you can find. You can just look in somebody's face and divine things. So the cards are just kind of like a gateway, a tool, of which there are many. I became a tarot reader because it's just happened to be the first form of divination I had access to, and I think that's the same for many people of my generation and younger. And so the more I'd say there's a big step that happened for me. The point at which I became able to divine things was the point at which I stopped reading tarot guidebooks ever. There was a jump where I learned to trust my own intuition, to trust my own sort of psychic abilities, I would say. I think it is important to learn a type of divination, because if you want to practice as a witch, then you need to be able to divine the problem or scribe for the problem before you fix it. Because when a client comes to you, you know, this is if you're a service practitioner, if a client comes to you with a problem, you can't always trust that the problem they're saying that they have is really the problem that they have. So divination, having a divination tool is really essential to practicing witchcraft, I think. But tarot is just one of many forms, and I think it's easy to get sucked into the idea that you have to have 50 tarot decks under your belt, and it is the only way, the true way. I don't wash with that.
Yeah, I've been trying to learn how to use playing cards, and I got a deck for like £1 in the works, and I loved how. And if you've suddenly got those out on a table in Starbucks, literally nobody pays you any attention.
Yeah.
It's quite sneaky.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I've never tried reading playing cards. I'm a bit scared of it as a tarot reader. Even though I read tarot, I'm somehow a bit scared of playing cards. But I just haven't tried it. Yeah, it seems really hard.
There's a lot to memorize with them, and I think because with tarot, even if you forget what like the 10 of Swords means, like most decks, like if they've got sort of pictures rather than the pips, it's fairly obvious what the 10 of Swords is about. Even if you can't remember the meaning, you're like, well, I know what I see in that picture. But with there's like 10 of Clubs. Can't remember
It's a
what
bit
that
more
is.
like it's like the Marseille deck taken to the extremes, I guess, you know, with the pip cards. Yeah, that's cool.
And I'm also thinking about, I remember when I did tasseomancy on the podcast, and it was that idea of obviously like or bibliomancy is a one that people go, oh, let me try that, and people are always quite happy to try that one because if you've got a book, you can do bibliomancy. So because obviously there's these other things that you can use for divination that people probably do have lying around the house. I mean, I even know people who do a form of augury, but with what their pet cat does, which I mean that could be horribly wrong, trusting your decisions to your cat. But would you say that there are ways that people do magic like all the time without even realizing that's what they're doing?
I think that definitely happens. In a way, I think magic is not so much to do with, the skills we learn. It's much more to do with stripping away and unlearning. So, for example, children are naturally super intuitive, and their senses are acute. The amount of sensory information children can process at high speed, when they're in that real sponge mode of just taking everything in. It's astonishing. And we lose that as we age. And we stop trusting our senses, and we stop trusting our gut instincts. We stop trusting our desires and our needs. And so I think, we do magic the whole time. We don't notice it, and we could do it more of the time if we unlearned a lot of the habits we've picked up along the way, and a willingness to be playful. A lot of magic is about relaxing into a playful state where different things can happen and there can be different outcomes. So I think whenever we're able to relax into that playful state, then magic can flow. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, actually, because so many of the books that I've sort of come across have always been like, they've always made it seem like it's this po-faced thing, like it's, you've got to take it like really seriously. And I think that idea of something being playful and fun kind of makes it more likely that you'll actually use it.
Yeah, I think so. And you just got to come back to the digging the hole in the ground and sticking the body in it. It's just like, hey, keep it simple. Just don't overthink it. Don't over emote. Don't overthink it. Just like do the thing. And magic is kind of just about doing something to make something happen, and you don't need to do something with all the bells and whistles on to make it happen. And I think a lot of witches historically have kind of laughed at ceremonial magicians who are typically male, and witches have typically throughout history been female, not always but often, and ceremonial magicians have often been upper class. Witches have tended to be lower class. And these bells and whistles and all this ceremony, it's like, maybe you just don't need it. Maybe you just need a bit more imagination. Maybe you need to trust your gut a bit more, that you can just make something happen with a stick and a stone. I laugh at ceremonial magicians now. I feel like my magic. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like my magic really started to become unleashed the moment I was able to laugh at myself wearing a robe. She says wearing a kimono of some sort.
And I think that's the part of the thing, because I know we mentioned before about Morticia being like your gateway drug, as it were. And I think when you look at like witches in popular culture, how very different they are. When I'm thinking of, like, say, Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer was like the big
Yeah.
one, sort of, I guess probably for our age group. And then obviously you've got other ones like Sabrina, like the original one, the proper one.
Yeah.
And I think
The proper
obviously
one.
I know it's really bad I say that, but I used to enjoy the one with Melissa Joan Hart in it, and I'm amazed at myself for remembering her name, because names are not a good strong point for me. But anyway, because of the fact that obviously there has been such a change from the way that they're presented in historical accounts and so on. Although it did make me laugh that I was reading about some witch trials somewhere where the witch finders kept like finding young pretty women innocent of witchcraft, and I'm like, wow, it's like that bias existed even then. Do you think that this sort of, I suppose, more glamorous perception of witches now in popular culture has been useful for witches as a whole, or do you think it brings its own problems?
I think the fact that everyone thinks they're a witch now, and it has become this quite aesthetically pleasing thing. It's easy to desire to be a witch when you see witchcraft portrayed on Instagram. It's really beautiful and it's pretty, and you just have to follow the steps or do the course and you can do it. I find it pretty annoying that everyone thinks they're a witch, simply because I do think of witchcraft as a service profession, as a service you offer your community. And I think the fact that everyone says they're a witch gets in the way of being able to find a practitioner who might actually be able to help you. An experienced practitioner who has learned in a particular tradition. And so it's kind of like all of these insta witches, if that's what we're going to call them. That's what a lot of people are calling them. These insta witches are just kind of like fog. They're just fog getting in the way of people being able to find the help they need. Because witchcraft in service of yourself it's pretty boring. It's just like capitalism all over again. But I think service witchcraft, that's something else, and that's something that needs to be preserved. And it's something that needs to be accessed easily. And at the moment, it's not easy to do that. Because you've all, in the village or in a town, people have always known who to go to. It might have been hush hush, but you'd still be able to find out who to go to if you needed XYZ done by occult means. But now it's kind of, we're in a bit of a worse situation in some ways, because nobody knows who to go to.
I think it's also the fact that if someone has a problem and like they're more likely to go like Google and look for a more mundane solution rather than immediately thinking, oh, I should seek out an occult practitioner. Do you think it's also like a bit of a change of kind of cultural perceptions, at least in the West?
Oh, for sure. And I think almost, I don't want to put witchcraft in with complementary therapies. It's that, it is a complementary therapy in a way. I think it's a bit broader than that. And we can go at it with a different lens. Like, I don't think you could have a sort of licensing body of witchcraft, for example. But it's it is definitely the case that Google has changed everything, and that includes people's desire to use witchcraft. And so maybe now I'm thinking about it, it's like, well, maybe the proliferation of witches has put the occult back in the imagination. So maybe it all works out in the end,
But I suppose it would help if there was kind of an easy way for people to sort of do their due diligence before they hire someone. Because I'm thinking, obviously, if you're going to even go on holiday somewhere, you generally look at TripAdvisor. And if you're anything like me, you look at all the 1-star reviews first. But I don't necessarily know if that sort of, I guess some people offer their reviews on their website, don't they? Like testimonials and things.
You get testimonials, but how do you know they're real, and who are they coming from, and have they been paid for? So I just tend to go, if I have a problem and need the services of a witch or a seer or a diviner, then I just ask a friend, I ask around, hey, I need some help with this problem. Do you know anyone? I think what I need is a tarot reader. I think what I need is an astrologer. Just ask around. It's word of mouth. And I think that's how a lot of people who come to me is through word of mouth.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So bearing in mind, obviously, we've just been kind of talking about the problems per se of like Instagram witchcraft. What other sort of myths or just misconceptions in general about witches would you like to see the back of sort of here in the 21st century? So I think I would like to think most people realize that it's not about like worshipping the devil and stuff, unless that's your particular chosen flavor of witchcraft. But what other myths do you think people still believe that are just nonsense?
What do people believe is still nonsense? I mean, there's so many so many things, but also I think that there's so much truth in the things we want to see the back of. Like you're saying, that we all work with the devil. It's like, actually, a lot of us do in some way, maybe not in the way you think we do, but we do. And so I think the misconceptions that I would like to see the back of are firstly, just the general idea that it's silly, that it's all silly. I find that really irritating, probably because it's something that, older family members might say to you, like, why, you're silly to believe in that thing. Like, I've definitely heard that from people in my family, so just a general silliness vibe. But in terms of claims, particular claims, I'd say, well, they're all true in some form somewhere. So I say just, yeah, let the rumors fly.
Fair enough. I suppose in some ways as well, it's one of those things where I guess I probably don't help with focusing on like the historical witchcraft in terms of how it dovetails with folklore and a lot of sort of
Mm,
folk practices that a lot of people don't consider magical or whatever. Like, you know how I've got this beamy bonnet about love divination, and
mm,
you could argue like a lot of those where you have to go to a place, say a thing, do a thing, usually a graveyard at midnight. I mean, that's never going to end well. And how people weren't tripping over stuff more often, I don't know. But you sort of think that's essentially like you're casting a spell then, but because it's a love divination and a saint might be involved, it's suddenly fine. So I think
mm,
I would argue the misconception that it can be easily divided away from other things is something that I find fascinating.
mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's just me, my personal soapbox.
Sure. I just love rumor. Like, yeah, I think when you're dealing with something like witchcraft, where there are so many rumors about what it is and what it isn't, so many misconceptions, um, I think it kind of forces a mystery on it, which I think there should always be, because I think as magical practitioners, you shouldn't give away all your secrets. You don't give your magical tools. You don't let others have what you've got, because you can't trust others with what you've got. That's why I think you have to do a solid magical training and have things passed on to you that are secrets, and you keep those secrets and you develop your own secrets. Um, because your magical knowledge is dangerous stuff, um, and it's personal. And so I think it's important to keep an air of mystery around magic and witchcraft, um, because there needs to be a kind of silence.
Mhm. I suppose it's the whole idea of them being a cult because they're hidden, and I think a lot of
Mm.
people have forgotten the hidden part.
Yeah, they're hidden, and a lot of things don't work if you talk about them.
Mm.
Um, I think silence, in a way, is a lost part of the art of magic and witchcraft. Like you said, you can Google everything you need to know about magic, apart from like the very core of it. You can Google spells till the cows come home. Um, but that's far from ideal.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
So speaking of occult, you're writing a book about women in the occult, isn't it? So
Mm,
where did the idea come from? What are your
mm.
hopes for it? Like, what are you hoping it'll do once it's out there in the wider world, and just kind of like sell it, basically?
Sure. I shall try. So the book is called Muses No More: Portraits of Occult Women, and it explores the lives and passions and practices of 17 different occult women, going back in time from Biddy Early in Ireland, the cunning woman Biddy Early in Ireland, and Isabel Gowdy, who uh, was involved in the Great Scottish Witch Trials, um, and said she was a witch, um, through to Marie Laveau, the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, who may or may not have been a fictional character. We think she existed. Sojourner Truth. We've got quite a few abolitionists in there. We've got a lot of feminists: Annie Besant, Moina Mathers, right through to the 1990s, early 2000s, Margot Adler, who was a journalist and Wiccan priestess. So really travel through time and across the globe, bringing to light the work of these women, many of whom you might have heard the name of, but there's not really a place that I've been able to find. Like, there's no compendium of women occultists you know, you can go and read a book about the Golden Dawn organization, and read about the women who were involved in that, because there was a few women involved in that. Or you can go and read a book about Theosophy and the women involved in that. But there's no one sort of gathering place, no hub of here's a bunch of women occultists, and the outlines of their lives and the themes that run through female practices within the occult. So, like I said, you know, this is really through an intersectional feminist lens, and so we're looking at broad themes of feminism, the fights for civil rights, you know, queerness. A lot of the women I write about are queer, and a lot of them are artists, and I think that's pretty interesting. And I got the idea. Well, the idea sort of comes from the fact that there is no book. You know, it's I'm filling a gap with the idea. Like, when I remember, you know, when I started reading about the occult, gobbling up books in my 20s, I was reading everything that I could find, and they happened to all be books by male authors. You know, all this serious magic, so-called. It's all Aleister Crowley, Gerald Gardner, you know, all the heavyweights happened to be male, and I thought that can't be right. And they sometimes seem to have female assistants. It's like, well, what about them? I want to read about them. They sound interesting. And then later on, I was asked to write a series of articles about women occultists for a folklore journal. And I just enjoyed doing that so much. I didn't want to write about anything else. I just wanted to keep exploring that line of thinking more. And so it became, yeah, sort of this book emerged just from my desire to play detective in these women's lives. And occasionally I'd tell somebody what I was writing, and then they'd suggest somebody that I'd never heard of, and I'd be like, whoa, who's this person, and go off on that trail. So yeah, we can think about it as a compendium. And also so that's part one, and then part two of the book is a set of rituals. So there's a ritual that I have channeled from each woman in the book. So these rituals are written in their spirit, for any practitioner of magic to use.
Cool. So when's that due out?
It's out next month. Yeah, we haven't got a specific date yet, but yeah, November is the plan, which is nice because my birthday's in November.
It's also
my
just
favorite one.
Christmas.
yeah, that's a good point. Genuinely hadn't thought of that, but that is really good, isn't it? That's really good marketing.
Excellent. Well, it definitely sounds like it'll be right up my street. And I'm just thinking, like, how do you sort of find out about these women? Because I'm guessing that nobody thought anything they were doing, well, some of them anyway, nothing was really important enough to necessarily write down. And I know someone like Isabel Gaudi's really quite well documented to an extent, but then how do you find out about her beyond like her confessions?
So it's for because the book covers such a huge span of time, my research methods really varied depending on who I was looking at. So sometimes my research was scholarly. You know, I read a lot of academic papers. I had to trawl through, you know, a lot of scholarly speak, which is the more boring bits of the research. And the more exciting bit of the research is when I got to watch films and see, you know, these women coming to life, you know, the ways they moved, the way they breathed, the way they spoke, and really going through archives. So even the BBC archives have been really helpful, looking at witches from sort of in Britain. A few of the witches I write about are in Britain. As I was saying, this was a really interesting political period for witches after the repeal of the Witchcraft Act. So some great BBC archival footage of, you know, witches on the BBC TV being like, hi, I'm a witch. I can say that now because it's legal. And so yeah, sometimes it'd be archival research. Sometimes I would just have so little to go on. I'd really be sitting twiddling my thumbs for weeks on end, thinking, how, I want to know stuff. How am I going to find stuff? And then lo and behold, somebody sends you a link to some tiny corner of the internet where there's an interview with somebody who knew the person who, and then it's just like following worm trails. But it took, my research took many different forms because of this huge time period.
Cool. I'm always fascinated to hear how other people do their research, because it's so easy to fall down that rabbit hole, and it's just, wish I hadn't started.
Yeah. I mean, the Shetland Library is fantastic because they have access to academic libraries. So I've been able to order for free any book I want and to keep it for almost as long as I want. So they've been phenomenal support. And they even have a van that delivers the books to my door because I live so rurally. It's great. Books delivered for free. Yeah, heaven.
Living the dream.
I know.
Oh, excellent. Well, that all sounds really exciting. Obviously, that'll be the kind of book I'll be buying like as soon as it comes out.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah. So thank you very much for coming on and chatting. Obviously, where would I will put links in the show notes, and as always, I feel the need to point like people don't know where they are on YouTube. Where is the best place for people to go to find you online?
Probably on Instagram. I'm an Insta-witch too. So Ùna of the Peat Bog, UNA of the Peat Bog. If you don't use Instagram, then you're very sensible. And you can just send me an email. My inbox is always open, so that's unamariablyth@gmail.com.
Excellent. And obviously, I will write the links out just in case anyone wants to sort of copy and paste rather than try and feverishly scrabble things down. But yeah, as always, thank you for having you on. It's been lovely. You've been the first sort of like part of this series, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how the other practitioners' answers kind of dovetail with yours or give a different perspective on things. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm really looking forward to hearing the series unfold, and it's been a pleasure to chat to you about these really interesting questions. Thank you.
I'm going to be sticking with it, but as well, that idea about we just dug a hole and put them in it, that is going to stick with me now.
Good. That's the takeaway. That's my big takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee. Or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.